this skier noticed a strange metallic shine under the snow after an avalanche. But what he uncovered forced the entire mountain to evacuate. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And don't forget to subscribe. More unbelievable stories are coming. Lucas Thompson had spent most of his life racing down the slopes of Crystal Ridge, a place he considered as familiar as his own backyard. Born and raised in Colorado, he grew up with mountains as his playground, and winter had always been his favorite season. The air was crisp, the snow was clean, and the world felt quieter up here, almost sacred. On that particular morning, the sky glowed with a pale golden light as the sun climbed over the rugged peaks, giving the untouched snowfields a silvery sheen. Lucas set off early, long before most tourists even finished breakfast, hoping to get a few peaceful runs in before the crowds arrived. Just days earlier, a massive avalanche had broken loose on the western side of the ridge. It hadn't hit any ski routes directly, but it had reshaped the terrain in ways that locals were still talking about. Fresh walls of snow, splintered trees frozen mid-collapse, and a long scar down the mountain where the avalanche had roared through. Patrol teams had already marked the zone as safe again, so Lucas, always curious and always chasing new lines, decided to ski near the altered section. It wasn't dangerous, at least, not officially, but it felt different, unpredictable. That sort of challenge excited him. As he descended the slope, carving sharp turns and leaving swirling trails of powder behind, something caught his eye. A glint, quick, metallic, unnatural peeking through a patch of snow not far from the avalanche's edge. At first he thought it might be a lost ski pole or some forgotten piece of rescue equipment. But the shine was too strong, too clean to be ordinary debris. Lucas slowed down, snow spraying around his boots, and came to a stop. The sunlight hit the object again. Definitely metal. Curiosity tugged at him hard. He stepped out of his skis, planted them upright in the snow, and walked toward the glinting spot. The closer he got, the stranger it all seemed. The metal wasn't lying on top of the snow. It was sticking out from beneath it, attached to something larger. Lucas knelt down, brushed the surface carefully with his glove, and felt his breath hitch in his throat. Beneath the thin layer of snow was a concrete surface. Not natural rock. Concrete. And embedded into it was a massive, weather-beaten steel door. It didn't resemble anything modern. The metal was faded and rough, the hinges swollen with rust, and faint, barely readable markings, likely military ran along the upper edge. Lucas squinted, trying to decipher them, but time had worn them away too much. Whatever this was, it had been here a very long time. Hidden. Forgotten. A cold rush of instinct ran through him. This wasn't something to ignore. He stood up, took a step back, and felt the weight of the moment settle in his chest. What was a reinforced steel door doing high inside a mountain slope? Why had no one ever mentioned an installation like this? The avalanche must have torn away the snow that had concealed it. For years, maybe decades. Lucas reached for his phone and immediately called the ski patrol. His voice trembled slightly as he described what he'd found. Within minutes, the dispatcher sent coordinates to the nearest emergency unit, and Lucas waited alone beside the strange door, pacing in the snow to stay warm. The mountains were silent, but he couldn't shake the sense that he had stumbled upon something far bigger than he could understand. When the first responders arrived, 3 patrol officers, a rescue technician, and 2 deputies from the county. They gathered around Lucas as he pointed to the door. Their reactions varied: confusion, disbelief, caution. The technician inspected the hinges, the concrete, the surrounding snow, and finally said what everyone else was thinking. This shouldn't be here. Phones came out. Calls were made. Soon, a larger team arrived with specialized equipment. Crowbars, cutters, drills. Lucas stayed off to the side, watching as they set up a small temporary barrier and began working on the door. Metal screeched and echoed between the peaks, with every attempt to force it open. Cold wind swept down the ridge, biting at exposed skin, but the rescuers continued relentlessly. Whatever was behind that door, they were determined to find it. After nearly an hour of grinding, striking, and pushing, the hinges finally gave way with a deep metallic groan. The steel door shifted, then slowly swung open. A breath of stale, frigid air rushed out, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of rust and something older, something untouched for decades. Beyond the threshold lay a long, narrow passage descending into darkness. No lights, no movement, just a hallway swallowed by shadow. The team leader, a seasoned emergency responder named Grant Wilson, lifted his flashlight, tested its beam, and stepped inside. "Stay back," he ordered the others. Lucas watched him disappear into the tunnel, his light flickering against the rough concrete walls. Moments passed, long, uneasy moments. The wind howled softly, filling the silence in his absence. Then, without warning, Wilson reappeared, running. His face was as pale as the snow, and his voice cracked as he shouted, "Back! Get everyone back! Evacuate the mountain now!" The urgency in his tone sent shockwaves through the team. Officers froze, then sprang into action, radios crackling to life. Lucas felt his heart drop into his stomach. What could possibly terrify a man like Wilson? What could be inside that dark passage? Within seconds, the emergency code was issued across all channels. Patrol alerts blared. Skiers on nearby slopes were ordered off the mountain. Staff were told to clear the area immediately. Lucas watched in stunned silence as the serene morning transformed into a scene of chaos. Snowmobiles sped across the ridge. Resort employees rushed guests onto buses. Police blocked access roads leading up the mountain. Lucas tried to approach Wilson, desperate for an explanation, but the man only repeated one thing. "Get back at least half a mile. Move, now!" His voice left no room for questions. Lucas stepped away, trembling as he realized the magnitude of what he had uncovered. The peaceful mountain he knew so well was suddenly a place of fear. And whatever lay behind that door, whatever Wilson had seen, was dangerous enough to threaten everyone on Crystal Ridge. He stood there on the snowy slope, surrounded by sirens and shouting and the hum of evacuation vehicles, knowing that nothing about this day would ever feel normal again. And he had no idea yet how close the mountain had already come to catastrophe. From the ridge, Lucas watched the calm winter morning turn into something that looked more like a disaster drill than a ski day. Within minutes of Grant Wilson's panicked shout, sirens began to echo faintly from the valley below. The sound grew louder and closer, bouncing off the rocky walls until it felt like the entire mountain was vibrating. Snowflakes kicked up by helicopter blades, and passing snowmobiles whirled in the air, blurring the clean lines of the slopes. Police SUVs crawled up the access roads, tires chained and lights flashing red and blue, turning the white landscape into a flickering storm of color. Fire trucks pulled in behind them, heavy and slow, their engines rumbling low under the cold air. County emergency vehicles lined the perimeter of the resort like a thin, nervous ring. A few minutes later, darker trucks without obvious markings joined them. Military green, boxy, purposeful. Lucas had never seen this much response for anything on the mountain. Not for blizzards, not for injuries, not even for previous avalanches. It felt like the entire county had been thrown into motion by something that no one would explain. Skiers were being rushed off lifts, their confused protests drowned out by shouted orders. Families in bright jackets were hustled down toward the base lodge and pushed toward waiting buses. Resort employees moved as fast as they could, trying to keep their voices calm while their eyes betrayed the same fear Lucas felt in his stomach. "Everyone off the ridge," someone yelled behind him. "Keep moving! Stay together!" But Lucas stayed as close as he was allowed to, the taped-off area where Wilson and the others had been. He watched as a line of cones and temporary barriers went up farther down the slope, pushing the safe zone back. He stayed just inside the permitted perimeter, clutching his radio and phone, heart still racing from what he'd seen and what he hadn't. He caught another glimpse of the door in the distance. It now stood half open, a dark wound in the white mountain. No one was going near it. Instead, the focus shifted to positioning. Officers fanned out, directing traffic, barking coordinates into radios. Firefighters positioned their vehicles around the resort buildings, as if preparing for some kind of blast or firestorm. A few uniformed men from the unmarked trucks walked together with serious faces toward Wilson. They shook his hand briefly, said little, and then formed a small circle with him, speaking in low tones Lucas couldn't hear. He tried anyway. He edged closer, but a state trooper stepped in front of him and lifted a gloved hand. "Sorry, sir. This area is restricted." "I'm the one who found it," Lucas said, his voice sharper than he intended. "I was here when they opened the door. I need to know what's going on. Is everyone in danger?" The trooper's gaze softened, but only slightly. "We're working on it. Right now, just be glad they took you back from that thing. Do yourself a favor, stay on this side of the tape." It wasn't the answer Lucas wanted. He stepped back, feeling small and useless, as if the mountain he knew had suddenly become someone else's territory. The world narrowed to the cold air burning his lungs, the crunch of boots in the snow, and the quietly simmering fear he couldn't shake. Eventually, he saw a familiar-faced deputy, Mark Henson, a sheriff's deputy from town. Mark was one of the few people Lucas trusted completely. He'd known him since high school. They'd hunted together a couple of times, shared beers after work, laughed about tourists who forgot what winter meant in the Rockies. Now Mark looked different. Older. Tired. His jaw was tight, his brow furrowed under his hat. He was talking to two of the military guys near one of the trucks. When he finally broke away, his gaze landed on Lucas. Their eyes met. For a second, Mark hesitated. Then he walked over. "You okay?" Mark asked, stopping close enough that they didn't have to raise their voices. "No," Lucas admitted. "I'm not okay. I was just skiing, man. I saw something shiny, thought it was trash or gear, went to check it out. Next thing I know, somebody's screaming to evacuate the mountain and trucks I've never seen before are flying up the road." He swallowed, forcing the words down. What did he see in there? Mark looked past him, toward the ridge, toward the open door partially hidden by people and vehicles. Snow drifted slowly through the air, lazy and silent, as if mocking the chaos below. "I shouldn't be telling you this," Mark said quietly. "Come on, Mark," Lucas pleaded. "You know me. I'm not going to run to the news. I need to understand what I stepped into." Mark studied his face for a long moment. Then he took a slow breath and nodded toward a quieter spot away from the crowd. "Walk with me," he said. They moved a few yards down the slope, out of immediate earshot. The sounds of radios, shouted orders, and distant engines faded a little, replaced by the soft crunching of their boots in the snow. "You remember all those stories about Cold War bunkers?" Mark asked. "Old missile silos, storage sites, weird government projects buried in the middle of nowhere." "Yeah," Lucas said. "On those conspiracy shows my dad liked, everybody always says there's some secret base under every other hill." "Sometimes," Mark replied. "Those stories aren't that far off." He pointed subtly toward the open door. "That," he continued, "is what's left of a Cold War storage facility, built in the early 1950s, back when everybody thought the Russians might send bombers straight over the Rockies, or launch something worse. His voice lowered further. They put it inside the mountain, a fortress in case the sky fell. Lucas blinked. You're telling me that thing is military? Was, Mark corrected. But nobody told the mountain that the party was over. He went on, his words measured and grim. The facility, he explained, had been part of a network of hidden sites created to store artillery shells and other munitions. Some of them experimental, the kind of stuff that never made it into the glossy history books. The concrete, the steel door, the faded markings. Everything about it screamed 1950s design, rushed construction from a time when the United States was bracing for a war that everyone hoped would never arrive. It was supposed to be decommissioned by 1962, Mark said. On paper, they emptied it out, shut it down, erased it from use. On paper, Lucas repeated. Mark's jaw tightened. Turns out paper doesn't always match reality. He shifted his weight, leaving a deep print in the snow. The story they're piecing together already, Mark continued, is that at some point, maybe right when they were shutting it down, someone didn't do their job. Maybe they left more inside than they were supposed to. Maybe they cut corners and didn't file the right reports. Maybe the records were classified so deep that, over time, they just vanished. The idea made Lucas feel slightly dizzy. So nobody knew this was here. Not anyone still around to do anything about it, apparently, Mark said. No record in county archives. Nothing in the state's documentation. The resort bought this land decades later and never saw a word about a buried storage site. For all intents and purposes, it didn't exist. Except it very much did. But that doesn't explain why Wilson freaked out like that, Lucas said. I mean, okay, it's creepy and secret, but why evacuate an entire mountain? What did he see? Mark's eyes hardened. He saw what time did to it, he answered quietly. This isn't just some empty bunker, Lucas. It's a trap that's been loading itself for decades. He described what Wilson and the first specialists reported back to command. Once they stepped inside the tunnel, they followed it down to a wider room, probably one of the main storage chambers. The place was cold, soaked with the smell of rust and chemicals. The concrete was cracked, in some places bowed inward by the pressure of snow and shifting rock outside. Worst of all, water had found its way in. Years of snowmelt, seasonal rains, and slow seepage from the mountain had trickled into the facility. No one was there to pump it out or maintain it. Pools formed, then standing water, then corrosion. Steel racks rusted, containers leaked. Whatever safeguards the designers had once put in place were long gone. Those artillery shells, Mark said. Some of them were just sitting in filthy water. Some were split open. Some were leaking God knows what. They saw crystallized residue on the cases, smelled things they couldn't even identify on the spot. Old explosives, plus moisture, plus unstable chemicals inside a sealed concrete box. That's not just dangerous. That's a time bomb that's been ticking for 60 years. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. He imagined rows of shells, dripping in the dark, submerged in murky puddles. One wrong move, one spark, one shift in temperature. That's why he yelled, Lucas whispered. Why he ran back out. Yeah, Mark said, because he realized real fast that the room he was standing in was basically a giant, unstable magazine. You hit the wrong thing, or the wrong thing hits it, and the mountain doesn't just shake, it blows. He nodded toward the resort below. If that place goes off, he said, you're not just talking about a few shattered windows. We're talking half the mountain face ripped open, shockwaves down the valley, debris crashing into the resort, people buried or shredded by rock and steel, and that's if it doesn't trigger secondary slides. Lucas's throat went dry. "And it's been like that for years?" he asked. "Maybe decades," Mark replied. "Waiting, hidden under snow, while people skied right over it, while they built chairlifts and lodges, while kids learned to snowboard 10 yards above a forgotten Cold War graveyard." The image made Lucas feel sick. "So the avalanche," he began slowly. "Cracked the bunker open," Mark finished. "That's what they think. The pressure, the shifting, the impact. Something broke enough concrete to let light in. It's probably what exposed that door just enough for you to see the metal. And if the avalanche had shifted just a little differently, or hit at a different angle, who knows? It might have triggered exactly the kind of chain reaction they're trying to prevent right now." Lucas glanced back toward the ridge, where teams were still regrouping and re-coordinating. Military personnel were now setting up equipment near the access path. Everything looked precise, tense, controlled. Nothing was left to chance. He swallowed hard. "So all of this," he said slowly, "the evacuations, the roadblocks, the trucks, it's because we've been sitting on top of a bomb big enough to erase this place." "Yeah," Mark said quietly. "That's exactly what it is." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them like fresh snow. Lucas suddenly felt much smaller. The mountain felt bigger, older, and less like a playground, and more like a living thing that had been forced to keep a secret for far too long. "You didn't do anything wrong," Mark added after a moment. "You did the right thing. You called it in. You backed off. Lucky for everyone, you noticed that shine today. If you'd ignored it, or if nobody came to check, we might still be up here, skiing over a bomb waiting for the right trigger." Lucas wasn't sure if lucky was the word, but he nodded anyway. Down below, a helicopter circled once and began to descend. More engineers were coming, more specialists, more people whose job it was to stare directly into the problem and find a way to dismantle it piece by piece. Lucas looked at the door one more time, now partly hidden by people and equipment. The mountain had hidden its secret well, but now the secret was out, and the clock, which had been quietly ticking for decades, finally had the full attention of everyone who could hear it. The next days, Lucas realized, would determine whether Crystal Ridge remained a place of winter memories or became the site of a catastrophe no one would ever forget. The night after the discovery felt longer than any Lucas had ever lived through. Even after he returned to the lodge with the rest of the evacuees, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the dark passage again, saw Grant Wilson's terrified face, heard the crack in his voice when he screamed for everyone to run. The mountain, usually a place of beauty and peace, felt like a beast holding its breath. By sunrise, the world outside the lodge windows looked different. Not because of the snow or the weather, but because of the presence of people who normally operated far away from small mountain towns. The Army Corps of Engineers had arrived in full force. Their convoy rolled in before dawn heavy-duty trucks built for disaster zones, generators, crates of specialized equipment, reinforced suits, and towers of floodlights that painted the white slopes with harsh artificial daylight. Soldiers and engineers stood in tight groups, speaking in clipped, low voices, reviewing maps and diagrams. Their expressions left no doubt. This was not routine. This was as close to an active bomb as anyone ever wanted to get. Lucas stood behind the designated perimeter, wrapped in a thick jacket and scarf, watching as the operation unfolded. From a distance, the ridge resembled a surgical theater. Every move was calculated, every footstep was deliberate, and every person who approached the bared entrance of the Cold War facility wore protective gear. Teams worked in 20-minute shifts, no longer. The risks were too high. Grant Wilson, after his first terrifying glimpse inside, had insisted on that limit. The specialists agreed. The first team of engineers entered the tunnel just after 8. They carried portable lights, chemical sensors, and equipment designed to detect movement under the floor. Lucas watched them disappear into the darkness, swallowed by the same passage that had sent Wilson running in panic. Minutes dragged by like hours. The mountain wind carried faint sounds, metal shifting, muffled voices, the quiet hum of scanning devices. Lucas felt his stomach twist with each noise, wondering if the ground would suddenly tremble beneath him, if an explosion would rip through the ridge in a storm of snow and debris. When the first team emerged, sweat beaded on their foreheads despite the freezing air. Their leader barked into a radio, and more equipment rolled up the slope. Whatever they'd found inside was bad enough to require more gear, more caution, more everything. Next came the second team, then the third. Each entered slowly, each returned with tighter faces and heavier steps. Lucas tried to read their expressions: fear, resignation, determination. By midday, controlled explosions began. They weren't the kind meant to destroy the mountain, they were the kind meant to save it. Engineers were detonating ice pockets around unstable loads, clearing debris and relieving pressure points inside the crumbling facility. But even controlled blasts carried danger. Every time one went off, the ground beneath the lodge shuddered like a heartbeat. Cups rattled on tables, lights flickered. People jumped despite knowing it was coming. Lucas pressed his hands against the lodge window, staring up at the ridge each time the mountain trembled. The sound of a contained explosion echoed through the valley like distant thunder. Snow shook loose from tree branches, cascading down in powdery sheets. Guests staying at the resort, most unable to leave due to blocked roads, watched nervously from common areas. Families huddled together. Kids asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Staff tried to keep everyone calm, offering hot drinks and reassuring words they didn't fully believe. On the second day, rumors started. Someone said the mountain could blow. I heard they found chemicals in there that could poison the whole valley. A guy said his cousin in the guard saw something like this once. It didn't end well. Lucas ignored the whispers. He trusted Mark, and Mark had told him the truth. The danger was real, and the margin for error was razor thin. Outside, the engineers worked with precision that bordered on ritual. They entered the bunker in small groups, moving like surgeons around a fragile patient. They carried out half-rotted crates, rust-streaked shells, corroded canisters. Some items were so unstable they had to be moved in insulated containers. Others were too dangerous to move at all. They had to be detonated inside controlled chambers set up just beyond the doorway. On the evening of the second day, Lucas stepped outside to clear his head and found Mark leaning against a patrol car, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the ridge. "You holding up?" Lucas asked. Mark let out a slow breath. "As well as anyone who's standing next to a 60-year-old bomb can." Lucas rubbed his hands together for warmth. "How bad is it?" Mark hesitated. "Bad. They say the main chamber is in worse shape than they expected. Cracks in the walls, corrosion everywhere. Some of the shells are breaking down chemically, and there's standing water in places where the floor's completely collapsed. It's a mess." Lucas swallowed. "How did this stay hidden so long?" Mark shook his head. The mountain kept it secret, and people stopped looking. Day 3 brought even more equipment. Large crates were flown in by helicopter machines Lucas had never seen before, labeled with numbers and warnings. The air hung heavy with tension. Even the wildlife seemed quieter. No birds circled the ridge. No movement stirred the tree line. It felt as if the mountain itself understood the gravity of what was happening. Engineers worked in narrow windows, 20 minutes inside, 40 minutes to rest, reassess, and log conditions. Their logs told a grim story: temperature fluctuations inside the bunker, pressure changes, chemical leaks worsening in some spots. Every few hours, a new controlled detonation shook the valley. On the fourth day, Lucas woke to a flurry of radio chatter. He rushed outside and saw a plume of white smoke rising from one section of the ridge. His heart stuttered before Mark approached him. "They're okay," Mark said before Lucas could ask. One of the interior supports collapsed, but nobody was hurt. They had to trigger a blast to redirect debris and relieve pressure. It worked. Lucas exhaled shakily. How much more do they have to clear? Enough, Mark said, that no one's sleeping tonight. That evening, the mountain glowed with work lights. It looked unreal, like a scene from a movie. Workers in protective suits moved in and out of the bunker like ghosts. Snow drifted around them, catching in the bright white beams. Then came day 5. The atmosphere felt different, tense, but also purposeful. Engineers moved with a new urgency. Radios buzzed constantly. Teams rotated in faster intervals. Something was shifting. Just before noon, a low rolling blast echoed across the valley, the largest controlled detonation yet. The ground quivered beneath Lucas's feet, and for a moment, the entire resort held its breath. But when the smoke cleared, the radios stopped buzzing in panic. Voices came through calm, controlled, relieved. They'd reached the last of the unstable shells and destroyed them securely. The rest had been removed, cataloged, and shipped to a secure location. The most dangerous part of the operation was over. That afternoon, engineers stood together near the bunker entrance, talking in low but steady voices. Some leaned on their gear, exhausted. Others gave small, tired smiles. And when Lucas asked Mark what they'd found, Mark finally told him. "The facility was worse than anyone imagined," he said. "It wasn't just unstable, it was on the edge of a spontaneous chain reaction. If you hadn't found that door, this place might have gone off in the next big thaw. Could have taken the ridge, the town, maybe more." He fell silent, letting the truth settle. Lucas looked up at Crystal Ridge, its snow shimmering in the afternoon light. He had found the danger by accident. But the danger had been waiting a long time. And now, finally, someone had listened. By the 6th morning, the mountain was quiet again. The floodlights that had burned through the night were turned off one by one. The constant buzz of radios faded. The endless rotation of teams slowed, then stopped. For the first time in nearly a week, Crystal Ridge looked almost normal, just another sunlit slope in the Rockies, bright and white and deceptively peaceful. But now everyone who'd been there knew better. The Army Corps of Engineers held one last briefing at the base of the ridge. Lucas stood near the back of the gathered crowd resort workers, a few local officials, some law enforcement. The engineers looked exhausted, but their posture carried the subtle relief of people who had finally stepped away from the edge of something catastrophic. "We've removed or neutralized all unstable munitions from the main storage chamber and adjacent rooms," one of the officers said, his voice carrying over the snow-packed ground. "The risk of accidental detonation is no longer present. The facility, however, is structurally unsound and will not be used, inspected, or accessed again." He paused, letting that sink in. "Per federal directive, the entrance will be sealed with reinforced concrete," he continued. "Multiple layers. Once that's done, it's done for good. No one goes back in. Not us. Not anyone." Lucas watched as heads nodded around him. No one asked questions. No one wanted to argue. It was clear to everyone there was only one right decision left. That afternoon, cement trucks rumbled up the mountain road, their spinning drums oddly out of place among the snowy pines. The path to the old door, now carved into the slope by days of footsteps and equipment, became the road to a tomb. Engineers and construction workers moved with efficient rhythm as they set up a framework around the opening. reinforcing the area with steel rebar, anchoring support rods into the rock. Lucas stood at a distance, near Mark, watching as they prepared to bury the secret for good. "You ever think about how weird this is?" Lucas said quietly. "We spent days trying to get inside that thing. Now we're paying good money to make sure nobody ever does again." "That's the only reason this place is still standing," Mark replied. "Some doors need to stay closed." When the concrete began to pour, it was strangely mesmerizing. Thick, gray, heavy streams flowed into the doorway like liquid stone, swallowing the metal frame, then the threshold, then the dark hollow beyond. With each passing minute, the entrance grew smaller, less like a wound and more like a scar that was finally healing. Lucas remembered the first moment he'd seen it, the sharp glint of metal, the feel of his glove scraping snow from the steel, the strange thrill of the unknown. Now that same doorway was disappearing forever beneath a man-made cliff of concrete. As the mixture rose and packed into place, the last strip of darkness vanished. The mountain swallowed its secret again. This time, though, it would not be allowed to speak. In the days that followed, the resort slowly shifted from crisis mode back to something resembling normal life. Roads reopened. Guests rescheduled their vacations. The news picked up the story, of course. Hidden Cold War bunker discovered beneath Colorado ski resort. But the details remained limited and carefully worded. The full inventory of what had been inside stayed classified. People in town whispered their own versions anyway. Chemical warheads, mystery weapons, things so dangerous they couldn't even be named. Lucas had heard them all, but he didn't argue with any of them. The truth was simple enough. Whatever exactly lay inside didn't matter as much as the fact that it had been unstable enough to erase entire lives in a single eruption. That alone was terrifying enough. A few days after the last of the engineers left, the resort owner called Lucas into his office. The man, usually polished and businesslike, seemed unusually humble. A small silver envelope lay on the desk between them. "I've run this place for 30 years, the owner said, "and I never imagined I'd have to evacuate it because of something buried under the snow. The officials made it clear. If you hadn't reported what you saw, we might not be standing here today." Lucas shifted, uncomfortable with the weight of the compliment. "I just saw something weird and called it in," he said. "Anybody would have done the same." "Maybe," the owner replied. "But you were the one who actually did." He slid the envelope across the desk. "What's this?" Lucas asked. "Your new pass," the owner said. "Unlimited, no expiration. You ski here for free, for as long as we own this mountain, and if we ever sell, it goes with you in the contract. Consider it the smallest possible thank you for, well, for everyone still having a job, and for this resort still existing." Lucas opened the envelope and stared at the card inside. It was simple, a sleek black design with his name engraved in silver, and one word under it: Lifetime. A strange mix of pride and unease settled over him. Free skiing for life. On a mountain he had almost unknowingly helped destroy, or helped save, depending on how you looked at it. "Thank you," Lucas said quietly. "No," the owner replied. "Thank you." Winter didn't stop just because the mountain had revealed an old ghost. Snow kept falling. Temperatures dropped. Tourists returned, drawn by the same trails, the same ridges, the same postcard views that had always made Crystal Ridge famous. Within a few weeks, if you didn't know what had happened, you might not have noticed anything different at all. But for Lucas, everything had changed. He went back to skiing, of course. It was part of him, woven into his life as deeply as the mountain itself. He strapped on his boots, clicked into his skis, and rode the lifts with the same familiar, quiet anticipation. Yet there was one stretch of the slope he never passed without feeling his chest tighten. The place where the old entrance had once been was no longer a jagged opening in the snow. The crew had smoothed the exterior, matched it to the surrounding rock, and covered much of the visible work with a layer of snow and natural stones. To the untrained eye, it looked like any other patch of mountain. All that gave it away was the plaque. It was small, mounted on a polished stone at the side of the run, just high enough to be noticed by anyone who slowed down near the boundary rope. The metal gleamed even on cloudy days, words etched cleanly into its surface. In this mountain, a Cold War storage facility lay hidden for decades, discovered after an avalanche in 20. Its contents were safely neutralized, and the entrance permanently sealed in honor of those who prevented a disaster. No names, no classified details, just enough to mark that something had been here, a danger, a secret, a near miss. Whenever Lucas skied past it, he slowed. He couldn't help it. His gaze always drifted to the stone, then to the smooth face of the mountain behind it, where tons of reinforced concrete now sat between the world and whatever empty shell of the facility remained. He would feel that same faint chill every time, not from the wind, not from the snow, but from the knowledge that he had once stood on this very spot without having any idea what lay underneath. Sometimes when the lifts were quiet and the slopes nearly empty, he would stop completely and rest his gloved hand on the stone. The mountain loomed above him, vast and indifferent. The sky stretched overhead, crisp and blue. It seemed impossible that somewhere beneath his feet, aging steel and cracked concrete still sat in silent layers, the last remnants of a different era's fear. He thought about how easily it could have gone another way. If the avalanche had hit a slightly different section of the ridge, the door might never have been exposed. If he had chosen another route down that morning, he might never have seen the glint of metal. If he'd dismissed it as scrap, or assumed it was just some outdated equipment, or decided he was too tired to investigate, everything might have stayed buried. Until something shifted. Until another avalanche, or a rock slide, or simple time itself finally pushed the facility past its breaking point. And then Crystal Ridge might have been remembered not for its views, or its slopes, or its family vacations, but for a blast that tore a hole in the Rockies and left a scar no one could ever ski again. Standing there, listening to the quiet whisper of the wind over the ridgeline, Lucas realized something else, too. This mountain wasn't special because it had a secret. It was special because its secret had been found in time. He wondered how many other mountains across America held similar ghosts. Old bunkers, sealed tunnels, forgotten test sites, buried caches of equipment from wars that never quite reached these shores, but still shaped how people built and prepared. Places drawn on maps that had long since yellowed and faded, filed away in cabinets no one opened anymore. How many resort towns were built on land that history had written off as empty? How many hikers crossed ridges that hid rusting doors just a few feet below the soil? How many locals told stories about weird spots in the woods without ever knowing how close they were to something that once terrified the world? Lucas didn't know the numbers. No one did. Maybe that was the most unsettling part. As he pushed off again and let gravity pull him down the slope, the air rushing past his face, he glanced back one last time at the plaque and the invisible line of concrete behind it. It struck him that there would be no way to count all the hidden dangers still buried in mountains and deserts and forests across the country. No way to measure how many times chance had been the thin line between ordinary life and unthinkable disaster. All he knew for sure was this. On one cold day at Crystal Ridge, a skier noticed a flash of metal under the snow and decided not to ignore it. And because of that, the story of this mountain remained one of close calls and quiet heroism instead of tragedy. The rest, the forgotten bunkers, the buried doors, the sleeping ghosts in stone, would have to wait for whoever found them next. This story could have ended in disaster, but one random choice saved an entire mountain. How many hidden dangers do you think are still buried out there? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.